So much to discuss. We're going to dive right in. We have Senator Chris Coons on the far end of the panel. He serves, as many of you know so well, on the Senate Appropriations Committee, where he is ranking member of the Senate Appropriations Subcommittee on Defense. He also serves on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And as a member of the Judiciary Committee's Subcommittee on Intellectual Property, the senator is focused on fostering American innovation and encouraging investment in research and development. Congressman Adam Smith, to my immediate right, represents the 9th District of Washington State. He serves as the ranking member of the House Armed Services Committee. He's held the post of the highest-ranking Democrat on the committee since December 2010. And in addition, he was chair of the House Armed Services Committee during the 116th and 117th Congresses. And then, of course, Eric Schmidt, the prominent technologist, investor, and philanthropist, the former CEO and chairman of Google, and among his various current endeavors, he is chair and CEO of Relativity Space. So I couldn't think of a better panel to dive right in. So let's start with Ukraine. Senator Coons, we're 4+ years into this conflict. What lessons do you see from Ukraine, and what is the call to action for the business leaders and investors in the room with us and within the sound of your voice?
Thank you, David, and thank you to everyone for being here and for the chance to speak at this important forum. Look, the lessons, I think, of the war in Ukraine, Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, are clear. That the Ukrainians have developed and continue to innovate a fundamental transformation in conflict, both using naval drones, air drones, and ground drones. They recently recaptured territory in Zaporizhia using a drone-only assault on a Russian-defended position. They have pushed the Black Sea Fleet a long distance and have managed to defend their coastline successfully with some significant partnership from Eric. They are delivering state-of-the-art both Shahed drone interceptors and offensive drones. The United States should be embracing them with open arms, investing in our partnership, using it to help solve our current impasse in the Strait of Hormuz, and dramatically reducing the cost of defending our homeland and building out what we need to project power and security for our allies and partners in the Western Pacific and in Europe. That we are not doing that, but instead gearing up to invest hundreds of billions more in antiquated systems and antiquated processes is a huge missed opportunity. And I look forward to a conversation about how we change direction in time to defend our innovation, our security, our alliances, and our civilization.
Well, Eric, you've been to Ukraine. You're working on a book on the future of warfare. Why does Ukraine matter in terms of technology, innovation, global security, and what are the implications for the Indo-Pacific?
Well, I start every day by believing that you actually have to fight for democracy. You have to actually fight for freedom. I wish that were not the answer, but I think there's plenty of proof. And if we have to fight, I want America to win. I personally believe, and the senator said it so brilliantly, we're at a moment when all the technology assumptions shift. And the simplest way I can explain it to you all is all those movies, all that great history, all the wonderful, courageous things. We shouldn't be doing any of that in the future. We should be sending robots instead. So we don't need more ships. We need more drone ships. We don't need more jet fighters. We need more non-human powered jet fighters and, frankly, missiles. We don't need more tanks. We need more very powerful drones. Now, I sit there and I go, like, how could that be possible? Well, remember that the tank is 100 years old. There was a time before tanks invented, and it was, of course, a fantastic weapon in World War I. We all know the story of nuclear in World War II. Technology can change war and change quite quickly. So the simple answer is that the future of war, which hopefully we will not be having, is powerful robotic solutions, call them drones, call them whatever you want, land, sea, and air, that are controlled by powerful networks using artificial intelligence that are highly precise. I can give you plenty of facts to support my argument, but I'll give you a simple one. There are essentially no woundings in the Ukrainian war. The weapons are so powerful, the drones are so accurate that you're dead or alive. And I say that with sadness.
Ranking Member Smith, your reaction?
Well, I think I want to emphasize 2 points that were made there. And number one that doesn't get talked about enough is what Eric said about fighting for democracy. And yes, there's a huge technological aspect to Ukraine that I think both Senator Coons and Eric pointed out well. But also, this is fundamentally who we're supposed to be about here in the U.S. Ukraine is very clearly fighting for economic and political freedom and for the concept of sovereignty. We should be all in on that. That is our global battle right now. Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, various terrorist groups, they want to smash the economic and political freedom world that was built, more or less, after World War II. We have a great example in Ukraine as to where we should be fighting for it, and we have not made that clear. I mean, really, literally rolling out the red carpet for Vladimir Putin and dressing down President Zelensky in the Oval Office is the exact opposite of where the United States of America should be. And second, to the point of technology, we have a $40 trillion debt. We don't have a ton of money. We desperately need cost-effective solutions to meet our needs in 1,000 different areas, but certainly in defense. And we have found that through the technology that Eric just described vastly better than I can. That's where we need to make the investments. Don't come in here asking for $1.6 trillion in a ridiculous defense budget given our fiscal climate. Let's use our knowledge to meet our deterrence needs in an incredibly cost-effective way. And we have the technology. We just need to embrace it.
So one fact is that the amount we spend on the national debt is now, and interest on the debt is now greater than the defense budget. So Eric, what is your perspective on the ability to bring costs down through technology and particularly through artificial intelligence and drones? As a business leader, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it looks to me like the military is not run the way you would run a business. I guess that's not a surprise to anyone in the room. Wouldn't you use the most effective, measured by cost, availability, accuracy, and so forth, solution to do the job, right? And unfortunately, in the case of defense, it's about destruction. It's about destruction of infrastructure, destruction of people, and so forth. That's called the kill ratio, unfortunately. And the new defense tech, of which my company is just one of many, have 100 to 1, 1,000 to 1 kind of differences. And that's measured in real combat. Anduril, Saronic, mine, a couple of others. We are known about, I'll give you an example. My company has the #1 Shahed interceptor in the world. We have the highest accuracy and so forth. We charge, roughly $10,000 for it, plus or minus. That's the list price. Discounts are available. And the enemy has Shaheds, which are about $30,000. So we're already cheaper. At some point at the Pentagon, one of the generals says, "Who knew that America had a company that had the leading one?" I said, "Well, I did, and I told you." So I think that there's some kind of a delay in understanding in the government. It may just be that there's so many people, right? So you find one person, you get them convinced, but there's so many leaders of one kind or another. It takes top-down leadership to say, we want to save money, we want to be more effective, we want to make America more secure.
If I could just on that, I think this is a problem throughout government. When I'm back in D.C., I'm fighting this battle with the Pentagon. Whenever they have a problem, they want more money. Back home in the Seattle, King County, Washington State areas, we're trying to figure out how to get affordable housing, how to deal with homelessness. It's always like, give us more money, give us more money, give us more money. And I'm always like, okay, what are you doing with the money that you have? And it's almost like I'm speaking a foreign language. They're like, no, you don't understand. We have a problem. We need more money. What's to talk about? That mentality in the modern era, when we have so much global competition and massive debt, is killing us. Let's start thinking about how can we get more out of what we're spending. And again, the beauty of it is the technology that we have available to us from AI and a bunch of other things really gives us the opportunity to do that. We got to change the mentality at the Pentagon. And I will say, Deputy Secretary Feinberg, I took one shot at the Trump administration. I'll say one positive thing. Deputy Secretary Feinberg gets this, and he wants to get us to that place. A little higher up, we want to build a $20 billion battleship for some stupid reason. So we got to fight that off to really focus on the people who get this. It's a fundamental culture change, and it's not just Republicans, it's Democrats, it's everybody. It's always like, how can we figure out how to get the most money for us? And don't talk about anything else. And if we don't change that mentality, fiscally, we're going to be buried.
So from an oversight and a legislative perspective, what are you and Senator Coons doing to change the incentive structure, to change the behavior that's led us to this place?
Well, I'll just quickly, and then turn to Sydney. We did acquisition reform last year, the SPEED Act, in a very bipartisan way. Mike Rogers, chairman of the committee, was as important on this as anybody. Terrific job on that. We worked in a bipartisan way with Senator Wicker and Senator Reed to speed up the process and really incentivize innovating faster at scale. So we set that up, and then we got to work on the culture at the Pentagon. But
Can I just add, the SPEED Act was one of the best things you've ever done in your long career. It really did enable this whole industry to get started. Senator?
We had a meeting late in the appropriations process last year with Deputy Secretary Feinberg. He came in with a huge presentation, asked for $26 billion and multi-year procurement authority for more than a dozen of the most critical munitions. It was so late in the process that both Senator McConnell, the chairman, and I said, we can't possibly give you that much money this late. We'll give you $4 billion, but we'll give you multi-year procurement authority for this whole range of munitions. And then we want to meet with you and hear from you regularly about what you're doing to really push the primes, to really try and crowd in private sector investment in partnership, in facilitization, and then to work with you to try and reduce some of the barriers. That's been a positive. Two things that I've been pushing on. First is partnering with our allies in co-production. We are not taking anywhere near enough advantage, both by reducing some of the barriers, ITARs, MTCRs, using partnerships like AUKUS to actually manufacture at scale some of the critical both munitions and systems where we're not there yet. Whether it's with Australia or Germany, with Finland or with Japan, we can and should strengthen our defense industrial base by genuinely partnering with others. I'm going to be pressing both for the Pentagon to scale and advance the acquisition of cutting-edge systems, to reduce total cost, to expand our partnerships with our trusted allies, and to further accelerate multi-year procurement. Last, the use of other transactions authorities is a key piece of getting outside the traditional procurement process that is sclerotic and wasteful.
Are there bright spots that you're seeing in some of the commands or in different parts of the Pentagon?
So, look, I'm concerned that both the combatant commands, the services, and the primes are resisting the concept that Eric's talking about and that I endorse and that Adam's done more than I have to advance, which is to rapidly move towards a fundamentally different style of warfare. But in combatant commands like AFRICOM, SOUTHCOM, and SOCOM, they have missions and responsibilities that spread over such vast geographies, and they have such modest resources that they are most likely to adopt drone technologies for surveillance, for engagement, for remote action. So I'm going to be pressuring and pushing on them and the services that are principally responsible for supporting their work, and I hope we'll get some uptake this year.
Eric?
I'll give you an example, and you're seeing the change now under a lot of leadership from these guys. In the Pentagon, there's now a movement to do the equivalent of a hackathon to get all of the systems to be able to connect with each other. Now you sit there and you go, what an interesting idea, right? Get the missiles and the radars and so forth actually talking to each other with like computer systems. Wow. The problem is the programmers are dead, right? These weapons are 40 and 50 years old. So it took pounding by the Pentagon on the primes to do this, but they're doing it. So leadership can make this happen. What I would say is the other thing is people are always concerned that somehow this will affect jobs in their districts or their states or what have you. Unfortunately, and again, I say with some sadness, there's going to be more people needed in the world I'm describing, more bombs, more weapons, but they're different. And we know this from the scale of destruction in the Ukraine war. So we're not going to be making fewer bombs, we'll be just making different ones to stay safe. We're going to have a lot more ships, but they're going to be drone ships. We're going to have a lot more airplanes, but they're going to be unmanned airplanes. So it's not that there's less jobs. It's just that they're building something different, right? So if you could, and there's no one in charge, right, because the whole system is split between the president and the Congress and so forth. But if a single person were in charge, what they would say is, do a replan where you take all of the current money, which is only $900 billion, plus or minus, I think it's maybe $1 trillion now, and reallocate it in this direction over a 5-year program. And by the way, more jobs, more investment as a result, not less.
Yeah, let me
Yes, please.
give you two positive examples, one on a small scale, one on a larger scale. I was down in Austin, Texas a month or so ago, visited Ceronic, by the way, which is making a huge difference on the shipbuilding side, but also visited a thing called the Software Factory that the Army set up, under General George, by the way, that was, how can we get to the point where DoD can buy software better? Because of the many things that they're bad at, they were terrible at that, and it was causing all manner of problems. So they went out and recruited Army-wide. Anyone who sort of showed a talent in this area, they recruited them, and they sent them down to Austin for a 2-year gig to find software solutions to all manner of problems, some on the lethality side, some on just the human resources side. How do we know where our people are? How do we know where the equipment is? That's the Pentagon learning. But the coolest thing that has happened really in just the last 5 years is the amount of defense tech investment capital that is out there. Certainly Anduril, Palantir, SpaceX back in the day, they started it. But now you've got hundreds of small companies funded in some cases by venture funds. A lot of times it's some 19-year-old kid who comes up with an idea how to build a better drone, how to build a better missile. And all of that money is going in. And we're starting to open up to allow them to come in and compete. And that's really cool in terms of what all these individuals are doing and this new money is. But the other thing that's cool about it that doesn't get talked about often enough is the impact it's having on the big primes, who we all love to hate. And the thinking was, well, the big primes, they don't know how to compete. They just know how to monopolize. And that's not actually true. We just set up a system that incentivized them to not compete, to monopolize. Now that they're being dragged into a world where they have to compete, there's a lot of smart people at Northrop, at Boeing, at Lockheed. So now we get the benefit of their ability to innovate because we've created a competitive environment, not a monopoly environment. And that's helping inch us towards the world that Eric has done such a good job of describing.
And Eric, please.
Can I just, I think it's worth, I'm a technologist and I think about where do we end up. And you tend to think of a drone as a person and a drone and another person and a drone in a combat. That's not actually what's going to happen. What's really going to happen is, think about a fighter jet, the F-35, $200 million. It has offensive and defensive systems. It has defensive systems to make sure it isn't hit by a rocket and so forth. It has offensive systems to do whatever it's going to do. Every drone will ultimately have the following structure. It will have an offensive part, it will have a defensive part, and it will have a human-ish brain, which will be the equivalent of an AI LLM, which within some limits will allow it, and those limits are defined by the laws of war, operate autonomously. We, America, need to build that, because that is the future. And woe is us if China does it first. And they have everything needed to achieve that objective.
Well, much has been said about the agentic revolution. What do you see the implications of that, and where are we in competition?
For this audience, everybody here knows what ChatGPT is. Everybody went through the ChatGPT moment. That's language to language. Because of emergent behavior, these systems are actually very good, especially if you ask them to start planning. You can say, well, show me the steps. Start thinking with me. And this has spawned a notion of agents. And an agent is like a travel agent. The older people who remember the human agent that you would call, and they would know who you were, and they would anticipate, and so forth. The younger people don't know what I'm talking about. So the industry is now obsessed with agents. And an agent can be understood as it has input, it has memory, it has a learning loop, and it has an output. So typical example, let's think about this conference. So in a couple of years, the first thing you'll do is all of you will opt into this because you're smart. You'll have a preference agent which will be looking ahead in your schedule, and it'll have access to your schedule. And then it'll call a conference agent, and the conference agent will study this Milken conference. And it'll say, well, who's coming and what's important. And then you'll have a relationship agent that will actually contact the agent of the other people who you actually want to on the sidelines. All of this without human interaction. It'll, of course, check with you for preferences, and then it'll produce follow-ups, summaries, and so forth. And you sit there and you go, no big deal, I have an assistant. Think about how much more efficient your life will be if all of that stuff is automated. By the way, including the hotel planning and the timing. And furthermore, imagine if it concludes 1 year, there's nobody at Milken you need to go. And the only reason you need to go is because you want to learn something.
That's unfathomable,
but you see my point, right? The value to you of the agentic revolution in terms of empowering you is huge. Agents are going to define your version of AI, the AI that you see, for a few years. There are all sorts of implications from agents. By the way, just one more thing about agents. There's a series of technologies that came out. One is called MCP, Model Context Protocol, which allows you to basically take all the databases in a company and manipulate them using English, which is, oh my God, right? We've been waiting for 50 years for this to occur. MCP shows up, and now all of a sudden, people can do predictive analytics in their businesses. Predictive analytics in the sense of, if I change this, do I get more revenue, and so forth. And then the next step is what is called scenario planning. Technically, it's called reinforcement learning, where you have a simulator and you look at forward scenarios. Everything I've just told you is true for businesses. It's also true for other institutions like the Pentagon, right? So you're going to see this incredible transition internally in companies. The Pentagon is an example. You have thousands of people who are planners, and they think. And I think that eventually these systems will think more deeply and more accurately than the humans that we depend on. You remember, by the way, all that stuff about hallucinations a few years ago? It's largely under control. They're still not perfect, but we're getting there. The technology is improving that fast.
Well, a question for each of you, especially given the investors within the sound of our voice, what are the greatest gaps that cry out for capital and investment where folks interested in the defense tech space what are the problems that they need to go address? Senator, I'll start with you.
Well, first, if you just think about the implications of what Eric just said, it'll transform deterrence too.
Yeah, exactly.
How we act, I mean, the whole point, frankly, of our military spending is deterrence. Deterrence requires the capability to fight and win and to communicate effectively to your opponents your determination to fight and win. And as they have and we have better and better and better scenario planning, it'll go all the way through it. And if at the bottom it concludes they can win, the odds that we will be at war are much higher. The odds of misunderstanding and miscommunication will become more critical, but those gaps will also become narrower. Where are there places for investment? Frankly, they are all over the place. The challenges to having a predictable return on that investment are mostly bureaucratic and political. But the savings for the taxpayers and the advances in terms of our capability to project force are massive. I mean, they're orders of magnitude. So folks who are willing and able to get engaged in advocating for the transformation of our procurement system, for the more effective engagement with our partners and allies, have really significant potential upside. The challenge is that our system does not respond quickly to market signals and is not really a market system, but our allies are rapidly rearming and are not spending the right money on the right thing, just as we aren't. But very few of them have the budget or fiscal headroom to make the mistakes that we're making and just muscle through it. So I would encourage partnering with some of our more capable allies and then back-selling to us through them.
Representative Schmidt, your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And I think the investments need to be in the areas that Eric talked about. How do you build the autonomous systems using AI to best anticipate everything? And it's not as simple as it sounds. As I said, there's hundreds, perhaps thousands of different ideas out there. They're not all winners, and they don't all meet what our technological needs are going to be. So the other thing we're going to need is we're going to need really smart people like Eric and others in a position to guide those decisions. So we don't buy just every new whiz-bang system. How does that system actually give us the deterrence we want? And then that's the second point, building off of the senator's point about deterrence. I think we need to start thinking about how we build the system in terms of deterrence. I've been very much opposed to calling it the Department of War, in large part because it's not the Department of War. It is the Department of Defense because that's what the law says, and I'm old-fashioned enough to think that we ought to pay attention to the law. But certainly the way the Trump administration is doing things, Department of War is more apt. We have to get off of this whole escalate to de-escalate thing, because there's no end to that. You wind up in constant conflict. I want to use these technologies to have the strength to actually deter conflict, not to use it to engage in conflict under the misguided notion that that will somehow end conflict. So getting that deterrence right is really important. Final point is just one big area is on manufacturing capability of critical munitions. We are behind on that because the systems that we are making, we don't have the manufacturing centers with the scale. Even if we decided to spend, Lord knows how much money, we don't have the manufacturing capability right now to do that. We need to build that up. And then, I can't say it any better than Chris said, partners and allies. We're not going to build it up on our own. We're going to need partners. It is a global economy. We can't do it all on our own. Part of the reason we shouldn't be so busily pushing away absolutely every ally, partner, and friend that we've ever had. We need friends now more than ever.
Eric, did you want to comment on that?
Completely agree with what both said. I'm pretty confident now that the U.S. companies are going to do well. I think the government has gotten the programs unmentioned up until now has been DIU, which has helped stimulate all of these. There's a bunch of such groups. They've been very helpful. It's interesting that in Europe, I know a number of investors who are now trying to do the same thing. Because the Europeans are rearming, there are underutilized assets where they can essentially do roll-ups and try to create the same thing. Everybody has the same problem. They're building the wrong stuff. They don't have the right materials. There's critical materials involved, things like that.
No matter how good the technology is, people will be needed going forward, perhaps repurposed. But what, Eric, maybe I'll start with you. Where do you see the talent, ability gaps, and what needs to change to move the people into the right areas that you identified earlier?
Well, in defense, the incentive system for young technical people is now positive toward investing their careers in these defense companies. They can do the math and figure out they'll make a fair amount of money from stock and so forth. I think that problem is solved. A lot of these technologies are new to kind of everybody, and they're hard to understand. I always tell people, find either some very young people right out of college or a whole bunch of math people and give them some hard problems and get them to think that way. And a lot of human organizations are not organized that way. And I think you're going to see an awful lot of sort of pain in the internal corporate and government transitions to these new things. They're coming so fast. As an article, I've been working on something called recursive self-improvement, which is where the system begins to learn on its own. There are now estimates that we're halfway through the beginning of that. At the point when the system can develop ideas on its own, it's like a big deal, right, for all of us, for the way we operate, the way companies work, and so forth. Again, my primary goal is to make sure that America is the world's leader in all of these.
Whether it's in the 9th District of Washington or Delaware or anywhere in between, your voters, representative and senator, need jobs. They need to support their families. What are you seeing from the talent and workforce perspective in this space, and what the challenges and opportunities are?
Well, I mean, a lot of it is career and technical education, workforce development, really getting people to get practical skills in terms of manufacturing, as Eric described. And I think we are beginning to make some progress on that. But the model, the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and beyond of go get a 4-year degree and everything will be fine, we need to be more specific in our skills. I'm beginning to see that to some degree, but we've got a lot more work to do. When you look at where we're spending our education dollars, we still spend a staggering amount of money on those basic 4-year degrees that don't necessarily give you that specific skill. The second thing, in terms of how we hire, to build off a point that Eric made, we need people who have a problem-solving approach, not a process approach. And nowhere is that more needed than at the Pentagon. The Pentagon was built on process all over the place. But these problems are incredibly complex. They need innovative, creative thinkers, people willing to adjust And here I want to give a shout out both to the Hoover Institute at Stanford, their Hacking for Defense program, and to Ash Carter, who was really very responsible for getting this started. He started DIU, some of these other ideas that were all about shifting that mentality. And the Hacking for Defense program is great because they take undergraduates, I think they're now in 65, 70 different universities, and they give them a real-world defense problem, something that the Pentagon's working on, and say, go solve it. And it gets them thinking in those terms. And I always love one of the big things that they always seem to say when they get the problem, the first thing they figure out is that the Pentagon was asking the wrong question, that they were looking at a different place. That is the type of creative thinking that we need. In the old days, the way the Pentagon typically works is, okay, they're asking the wrong question, but it's what they're telling us to do, so for 3 years, we're just going to keep plowing down that road. I joke, it's like the Office episode where Michael drives the car into the lake because that's where the GPS tells him to go. We're teaching people, no, if you don't think that's right, have the confidence and the ability to pivot. So I think all of those programs are moving us in the right direction.
Does there need to be more flexibility in the Pentagon rules, the personnel system?
And there needs to be more flexibility in money. In fact, the coolest thing I've heard on this platform is when an appropriator said that we needed to give the Pentagon more flexibility because, that is really, really crucial. We also tend to, in Congress, block every dollar off so that so we have to be able to open that up to allow for that type of innovative pivoting along the way.
It's just as in the Pentagon, they have what is called color of money problems. And it turns out software was seen as sort of maintenance. And so they never developed a software culture like you would expect you would need in any enterprise. And I worked hard on this when I worked for the Pentagon. And there have been some improvements, but fundamentally software is not treated as the leading item. Now, if you think about it for a while, we go back to the senator's point about deterrence. If both sides have lots of stuff, right, what's the deterrence going to be? It's going to be algorithmic. It's because we have better approaches to solving the problems defending the country than the other side. Algorithms are inherently software-based. Again, I want to say that I want those algorithms to be owned, controlled, and developed in the United States. How do we get them? We get the top smart people. We get them excited about this. The Pentagon is standardized on an interconnection system called Lattice from Anduril, which is great. That's a start, right? Expose the data, get people working on it, and solve these problems. We can deliver on your vision, Senator.
Senator, your views on attracting and retaining and repurposing where necessary the talent that we need?
What scares me the most is the lack of urgency. What Ukraine has is urgency because every single day they're pummeled by another wave of drones and ballistic missiles.
It's existential for them.
It is literally existential. What entrepreneurs and venture capital and real innovators in America typically have is a sense of urgency. What Eric has is a sense of urgency. What is largely lacking in our political and military systems is a sense of urgency that is anything like the timeline on which these technologies will fully deploy and our adversaries will coalesce around genuinely challenging our system and values. So first, we need a much greater sense of urgency before we get a wake-up call that we don't want. Second, to the workforce questions, there are a variety of things I agree with Adam that we're doing that are improving career and technical education, the preparation of the building trades. There's a very strong market signal for what have historically been called blue-collar jobs. I'm from a town that, as DuPont shut down and as our auto plant shut down, transitioned to credit cards. We got a lot of people in legal and a lot of people in finance. Those are the jobs where there's the most anxiety about AI replacing your paralegal, your account manager, your customer service person. And we need a forward-looking, optimistic approach to how AI can and may unlock more job potential, and then delivering the training and the skills, which are both actual skills, but also an approach and a mentality, so that there is optimism about what AI might unlock in our private sector. Senator McCormick and I are working on two real centers in our immediate region. The Boeing facility at Ridley Park that built all the V-22s and is building the last of the Chinooks, and our oldest shipyard, the Philadelphia former Naval Shipyard, where we've got a Korean partner investing billions. Those two incredible assets are not going to produce state-of-the-art capabilities if we don't change the workforce that's going into them, what we're expecting to come out of them, and our sense of urgency about those outcomes.
And that's a federal, state, local, private sector issue, right? Whole of nation. In the short time that we have left, I'd love for each of you to share, if you have something in mind. Given that each of you has exquisite experience, relationships, and insights, is there something important that you recognize to be important that isn't getting the attention it deserves in the current conversation about innovation and investment and partnerships?
I've said it already, and that is the fact that we do not have an infinite amount of money, and we need to start thinking about these solutions in terms of scarcity, which is contrary to the American mindset of, we can have it all. But I also think scarcity mentality can drive us in a positive direction. I'm always fond of the Winston Churchill quote, "Gentlemen, we're out of money, now we have to think." I think it incentivizes you to go find solutions, just like Ukraine. Ukraine didn't have limitless resources. They had urgency. So I think, not focusing enough on we have a limited amount of resources. We have to get every last bit of value out of every dollar we spend. We are not paying enough attention to that aspect of the problem. Eric?
I'm more in the end of my career. I started as a software programmer, and now I watch what Claude Code can do, and it's so much better than I was. And I was so good when I was 20. Oh my God, my ego is insane. So the most interesting thing that I think people here don't understand is how much the algorithmic world is changing. So typical, here we are in California, those of you visiting, what do people do here aside from the obvious things? They get up in the morning and they arrange their 10 Claude Code software robots to solve various problems. And then they watch them. Then when they go out to lunch, they make sure they have enough tasks to keep them busy during lunch, right? When they get back from lunch, they sit there and they watch these things all day. And at night, they set up the objective function for the overnight computation, and it's produced. This change of productivity is profound. It is profound at the software level, which is where you first see it. But if you look at, for example, and I'm not trying to advertise Anthropic here, just these are two examples for you to study. Take a look at Cowork, which is the equivalent for non-programmers. Automate your world. And if you don't like them, the other guys have other products which have come out recently. This is the most interesting new development. It started about November of this year. That's how new this is.
Senator, would you like to close this out?
Yes, the speed of change in the private sector and with AI is breathtaking and will unlock an enormous amount of potential wealth, potential solutions, potential cures. But we are not paying enough attention to the human costs and the potential political and social disruption of the mass shift of tens of millions of jobs. We can get ahead of this with optimism and with a commitment to invest more in the things that only people can do and that we will need people to do better and at a higher value in the future. We're dealing with a 19th century political decision-making system in the midst of a 21st century acceleration of technology. And whether it's in healthcare or it's in defense or it's in education, we have to be agile and we have to have a sense of urgency if we're going to win this moment.
A wise note on which to close. Please join me in thanking the panel.